Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country, around the world, and especially in Nebraska, we have a very timely, important, courageous guest that I have been eager to have on this show for a long time, who is right smack in the middle of all the issues we've been covering and are at the inflection point for so many Americans. I am very happy, proud, and honored to have finally joining us on Independent Americans, the great and powerful Representative Don Bacon from the great state of Nebraska. Welcome, sir.
I think you overstate my status, but I appreciate it. Thank you. It's good to be on with you.
Well, maybe not this week. You're a veteran, so you're used to being in the middle of all of it. But you are right now smack dab in the middle of some of the most important issues, and I think bringing a really independent voice. That's why I'm so excited to have you here right now. Want to get into Ukraine, tariffs, national security, Nebraska. But you're a grandpa. You're a grandpa. You've been a combat leader. You've led people in combat. This is a very trying time for folks, especially as we wake up to the markets continuing to be in flux. How are you, sir, and where are you? We ask that of every guest, but where are you right now, and how are you?
Well, I'm in Papillion, which is a suburb of Omaha, and this is where we settled down after I retired in 2014 out of the Air Force after 3 decades in the Air Force. I had 3 assignments at Offutt Air Force Base, so this became home over time. And getting ready to head back to D.C., unfortunately, and we'll be there through Thursday. A lot going on there with tax policy is the big thing right now in the House itself, and trying to figure out how much cuts we got to make the tax to extend the taxes. So that's going to be the big debate this week. And of course, we got trade going on. But I'm in my home, and this is a home I hope to stay in until I'm 95 years old, or however long God gives me on this earth. And I love being home.
And at times like this, sir, you're obviously leading the people of your district, but you're also leading your family. And a lot of folks are concerned, worried. There's just a lot of chaos and mayhem. What's your message to those folks, both in your district and maybe even more importantly to your kids and your grandkids who maybe have some anxiety or wondering what's next? They look to you for your steady leadership. What's your message to them?
As you mentioned, I'm a dad of 4 kids. 3 are married. We have 8 grandkids. All the grandkids live within about 10 minutes of our house, so that's very convenient. And I saw them Saturday and I saw them Sunday, right? Mm-hmm. My main message is keep your faith in God first. Because I think if you don't have a faith in the Almighty, and I believe in the Bible, I would have a lot more anxieties. Like, I think the economy is very unstable right now. We've had $6 trillion lost in the stock market, not counting what's going on today yet. I know people in Nebraska are losing their market access to Europe right now. So there is a lot of fear out there, and our politics are all jumbled. It's crazy. I could write a book on Democrats sound like Republicans today, Republicans sound like Democrats today, and it's crazy. And I haven't changed. I'm a Ronald Reagan guy. I was a Ronald Reagan supporter in 1976 when I was 13 years old, and I've been sort of the same guy ever since on that. But if I didn't have a faith in God, I would be worried. I know I have an eternity with Him. I know we're ultimately in His hands. Sometimes bad things occur, but God makes all things turn out for the good for those who love Him and follow Him, and that's where I have to keep my faith right there.
I think a lot of us are sharing your prayers and hopes and faith, and also feel that deep concern, especially because the politics are so divided. And you are kind of an old school Nebraskan representative. We've talked a lot about Nebraska on this show and the bicameral and how it represents maybe a model in many ways for how independents especially can be better represented in our elected government. But it feels like the Democrats are crazy and the Republicans are crazy, and there aren't too many voices in the middle. But you sit in that middle spot. You get a lot of friction for it, but you're not afraid to go against your own party. You're not afraid to be out in front alone. And you're doing that right now on tariffs. So I want to start with that if we can. The market's had 3 at least terrible days, catastrophic days. The tariffs have kind of blown apart everything and create a lot of chaos and anxiety. And you stepped out in front and said you're going to introduce legislation to give the power back to Congress. Can you talk about what your plan is here and why you're doing it?
It's really Senator Grassley's bill in the Senate. And him and I align a lot, and not by design. I talk to him once or twice a year, but on a lot of issues, I'm sort of a Grassley Republican as well. In fact, he got elected when I was a freshman in college. And I'll never forget it. My professor was crying about it. I never forgot that. But, the Article 1 in the Constitution makes it clear that Congress has the power of the purse, power to tax, power to do tariffs. And what Congress has done, going back about a century ago, they gave emergency powers to the president. I don't think emergency powers is what is going on right now. I mean, I see an emergency as Russia invading Ukraine. Let's put tariffs on Russia. Or China's invading Taiwan. Let's put tariffs on China. But what we're doing right now is we're developing a whole tariff policy, and we're laying a global 10% tariff out there. Plus, we're targeting some countries at an extraordinarily high rate. We could talk about that later. But this is a policy, not an emergency tariff. And I think we should regain this power, this authority that the Constitution gave us. And what it simply says is if the president wants to do a tariff, he has to get approval from Congress. And that's part of our taxing and our tariff authorities the Constitution gives us. I know it rubs some people terribly wrong. And I just say, hey, it's the Constitution. And these same people call themselves constitutionalists, but they're really not. They're about, I don't know, they're following one person blindly, if you ask me. And it's sometimes it takes people like us to stand up and get a policy in the right direction. I'm not opposed to all tariffs. I think there's some countries out there that block our goods and make it hard for us to sell our agriculture products there. And there should be negotiations. A tariff may be a part of that. But a global tariff and a global war right now. So this is a war, a tariff war. And it's the world against America right now. I don't think that's too smart. I don't think that's what Americans wanted last November. And I think it's gonna be very hard for us to come out on top of this. We'll get some wins, but there may be a lot more losses in this war, this global tariff war that we're in right now.
Sir, you're a strategist, and you're, an uncommon voice of reason in Washington right now. Folks who are listening to you maybe for the first time are saying, I haven't heard enough from this guy who sounds like he's making sense. Nebraska has a long history of Republicans and Democrats who are veterans who make sense, right? Guys like Chuck Hagel, Bob Kerrey, they've been on this show before and talked to our community. You're up against kind of everybody here. It's the John McCain strategy, right? So you're going into Congress and largely going to be taking on your own party, especially in the House. How do you actually get it done? Like, you're planting the flag, you and Grassley are gonna hold that spot, but how do you get consensus here? Or do you wait for the popular opinion to come to you as the market continues to implode? Right. And are there other strategies you can implode? I mean, you can imply if he just blows past it and doesn't care what y'all do.
Well, I do believe the Senate is closer to passing this right now. They have 7 Republicans already on this legislation, and all they need is get a 60 total. And I think the more you see things unravel on the stock market, and I think you're going to see unemployment and inflation take some hits on this because tariffs are inflationary, right? And especially, it was one thing when President Trump did this, focus on one country like China, that you can mitigate that. But when it's a global thing, there's a likelihood we're going to see some other economic indicators not go the right direction. I hope not. I wish the best for our country. But I think the Senate can pass this first, and then as you see the economic indicators go one way or the other way, this is going to be a more viable option, possibly in 1 month, 2 months in the House. So people say, hey, this isn't working. And I got to tell you, Republicans haven't been a tariff party since 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Act. And as you know, that put us into a massive depression, and we lost Congress for about 6 decades. And we became then a free market party. And I think it should be a fair trade, but ultimately we want free trade because we know this gives us the best products, the best price, and the most efficient manner possible. That's what free trade does. But it's got to be fair. So I'm not against all tariffs, but I don't believe in this war on everybody approach. It should be a little more targeted. I think we should focus on China. China is a predatory economic country that is not fair with American industries, right? So I'm not totally keep your hands off all of this. I don't think that works either. But I think we should target a few countries that have been not fair to us. And with the EU, there are allies in NATO. I think we should be in discussions with them. They don't have tariffs on our products for the most part, maybe with small tariffs, but they have all these rules that block our beef, our corn, and they're trying to protect their farmers while they're selling us their Scotch, their BMWs, and you name it. So I think there should be some discussions. It should be fair, but I don't think we have to go into a trade war with them right out of the chute. Let's sit down with them. I talk to these countries a lot. They know that they got to right size the ship for what they're doing. They know they're not being fair. So I think there's lucrative ground to work with the EU, for example. So I am a strategist. Take things one at a time.
Well, let's talk about a different kind of war that you have also been out in front on, I think importantly and in a principled way. You know, you said you're a Reagan Republican. I think Ronald Reagan would lose his mind if he saw the Republican Party stance on Ukraine right now, where we're abandoning our allies. We've had an opportunity to take away significant percentage of the Russian forces without losing any American lives. Our international community is now, lined more and more against us, and America feels more isolated. We've talked on this show to a lot of people inside Ukraine, advocates for Ukraine from all backgrounds, but you seem to be maybe the most important voice in the Republican Party right now, and one of the most important voices in America right now in support of Ukraine. You've been steady. You're catching a lot of flack for it. Can you talk about what you think happens next? We talk a lot about what's happening now, but what happens next, and where do you want to hold the line and ensure whatever kind of support you can for Ukraine in this fight for freedom?
Obviously, we want the war to end, but it's got to be a just peace. And so, on one hand, I applaud the president. It's good to negotiate, but we got to realize we're negotiating with a bad person, a bad character, not a good faith negotiating person in Putin. And all I've wanted really from the White House on this and the negotiations is moral clarity. It was Putin who started this war. He's the invader. He's bombing cities. He kidnapped 19,000 Ukrainian kids. He's murdered POWs. I could go on and on. We should have clarity. Who is the bad guy or who is the invader? And Ukraine is the innocent victim. And there's a lot of propaganda out there. I've studied Russia since I was 18, and I was an intelligence guy for a good chunk of my Air Force career. So Ukrainians, they want to be part of the West. They want to have a free market country. They want rule of law. They want to be on our side of things. And Russia cannot stand the thought of that because another Slavic country embracing democracy is a threat to Putin because he thinks, okay, the Russian people will expect this next. It's our national security interest that Ukraine remain free and part of the West. So that's the bottom line. And how does this happen next? I believe that Putin will try to string out negotiations while he's bombing cities. He's trying to grind Ukraine down. And I think we have to realize that he's not into a real serious negotiation. So that means we got to give Ukraine all the weapons we possibly can and also keep pushing EU to do the same in other countries. We can't bear this cost alone. And they need good weapons that can hit targets at 200 miles away. You know, if you can hit a mailbox 200 miles away, that's scary when you're a Russian. And but we need to be going after Russia economically, trying to squeeze them. They have $300 billion or so in assets out in the West. I think we should take it and give it to Ukraine. You know, this is Russia's war, and we should do everything we can to help. Everything up to putting troops in Ukraine. I'm not advocating for that, but we can do a lot to help Ukraine prevail. And in the end, we got to break Putin's will. That's what Clausewitz talks about, right? We got to break his will, and you do it by making the cost too high.
Sir, you're saying all the right things, and I think reasonable, patriotic, nonpartisan things, but it's consistently not where the president is. And, it's exacerbated by some of his recent national security decisions, most recently firing General Hawk, right? Without any explanation from the Pentagon. We didn't get a formal explanation from Secretary Hegseth or anyone else. I think Hawk is one of 11 four-stars in the entire military. He's out, and we get a statement instead from Laura Loomer, the radical conspiracy theorist. I'm a 9/11 first responder myself. I'm talking to you right now, a couple blocks from ground zero where I was on 9/11. To me, it's obscene that she's even near the White House and near the president, much less speaking on behalf of him, which is what it seems like it is right now. Can you break down what happens here? Because it's coming on the back of Signalgate. We know there's now an IG report investigation happening at the Pentagon. And maybe most importantly, what can be done about it? He's fired Hawk. We don't have any clarity. That's NSA and cyber. And it feels like more chaos around our national security at a time when we can't afford it.
So the president and his team have said very little about the firing of General Hawk, who, by the way, is a friend of mine. We served together. I was a one-star when he was a colonel. We served on the same team. And I was very impressive. You could tell he was going places there. But it appears, I think the reporting's accurate, though the president has not said this is the case. But you can read it. We had the conspiracist Loomer come into the White House and made a case for against 5 or 6 people in the White House, and then also General Hawk, also the number 2 person at NSA, and inferred that they were traitors because they were hired or put in those positions by General Milley, and that which infers everybody that got any job under General Milley is also under that shadow, and that's just not fair. I know General Hawk. There's nobody more qualified and ready to lead NSA and Cyber Command than he. He did it for 34 years. He served at the signals intelligence level as lieutenant and in cyber operations as a company grade officer, and he worked those jobs from the time he was a second lieutenant to the time he was a 4-star general. And so nobody's more prepared to handle NSA and Cyber Command than him. And then they fired the number 2 guy at NSA, or lady. It put us back. He just attacked or got rid of 2 of the capable leaders we had. I got to tell you who's happy with that. It's Russia and China. And a lot of people don't understand why I just don't shut up and accept this, but it's unacceptable to have someone like Loomer come into the White House and the next day 6 people get fired, right? Because she says they're traitors. General Hawk is not a traitor. He's a patriot. He is 10 times the person that she is. And I'm just so disappointed in that decision. But I think the president needs to know there's people in the party that are not going to be just an echo chamber, that we carry a moral compass. In the end, I'm not about being a follower first or a party guy first. I'm a Christian first, an American second. I'm going to carry this compass and try to do the right thing. Now, good people could disagree at times. I get that. But I think I had to speak up on this because what happened was wrong. And I think it hurt us. I'm the cyber subcommittee chairman under the Armed Services Committee. I know the price that we just paid for that decision. And now we're going to be rudderless for months when it comes to cyber policy. It's a shame.
Sir, it's a shame that more Republicans don't sound like you, but the party seems to be more and more radical. The president seems to be more and more radical, and maybe to put a pin on it that you focus on, lacking moral clarity. The opposite. Some of the way he presents himself, the decisions he makes seem the opposite of moral clarity. So, this is independent Americans. We see more and more Americans declaring their independence from the 2-party structure every single day, especially in a place like Nebraska. Is there a point where he crosses enough lines of your personal moral clarity where you'll leave the Republican Party?
One of the reasons I am a Republican is that some of the social issues. I'm a pro-life person, and I think the Democrat Party has gone so crazy on those, and I won't belabor point by point, but they went off the rails the last 4 years. And I think that's one of the reasons why this election, when you talk about sports and things like that, and some of the stuff defies common sense. I was a Republican since Reagan ran in 1976. And I plan on being that kind of Republican. And maybe there's a time that maybe you don't have to vote for somebody. You can leave it blank. And I don't mind. And I voted for 1 or 2 Democrats down ballot. I still got to go case by case, right? And vote your conscience. But I want to be an advocate for the values that I think worked: peace through strength, standing up to bullies, federalism, keeping power at the local level, keeping our taxes as reasonable as we can. I come from the pro-life party, and that's who I am. I'm always going to be that way as long as God gives me time to live. But there's 2 things I'd like to bring up that I find interesting, and you're touching on it. One, I read a lot of books about the Judeo-Christian ethic that we as Americans had. And now there's some books that are talking about how we're in the post-truth society. And if you read some of these books, like one from Rabbi Sachs, he's from Great Britain. He passed away a couple of years ago. A post-truth society, it's more important to win than to be doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that in our politics today. It's about winning. It's about following your leader. It's not about being right issue by issue. Secondly, if you look at the Republican Party right now, we sound very much like the 1930s Republican Party. Isolationist, anti-Europe, tariffs were a big thing. That's how we got, part of the reason we got into the Depression. And it didn't work. The 1930s Republican Party, financial security, foreign affairs, tariffs, it backfired. And we then became the party over time of Eisenhower and Reagan. That worked. And what I'm hearing from Democrats today, like I've talked to some of them, we need to strengthen our military, got to stand up to Russia, tariffs are bad. And I go, you sound just like Reagan. What happened here? We've had just a conflation between the two wings of our party. And a lot of our wings now, they come together and they vote the same way.
Mm-hmm.
AOC often votes with the far right for different reasons, but their no's or yeses are the same. And I think there's whole books out here ready to be written on this political shifting of the winds here. And I've sort of been watching it. But I'm watching it as a Reagan, Goldwater, McCain, Eisenhower guy.
Yeah, I mean, you sound like a politically homeless guy. I mean, like so many other Americans, when I hear you talk, I say what I think a lot of folks say about, I wish you were independent, right? And we see a place like Nebraska where I've had this conversation with Chuck Hagel. I've talked to Adam Kinzinger and others, and I say, why are you still a Republican when it feels like the party has left you and crossed those moral lines? But
even
in Nebraska,
even if you're independent, you still got to caucus with one side or the other.
Yeah, so let me ask you that if I
It's hard
can.
on that.
Because Nebraska is really interesting, right? We saw Dan Osborn, who we had on this show, who captured a lot of energy, a lot of attention, ran as an independent. He's a Navy veteran, which I think was an important factor, a working class person. Now he said he may run against Pete Ricketts, who is a Republican, who's a billionaire, who's never served in the military. Maybe there's an opportunity for him to put up a fight again, similar to what he did with Deb Fischer. Do you have any, immediate reactions to that, to Dan Osborn against Ricketts, and what's your take on how that could pan out?
Pete, on a lot of these issues, agrees with me. He's less vocal, maybe because he's got the Western Nebraska, but I find him very much to be a Reagan type Republican as well, and he's tough. He's going to be. He's a sequoia out there, but politically. So I would not underestimate Pete Ricketts in this. And he's a very smart guy. I mean, yeah, you're right. He's come from a family of the Ameritrade, but I've watched him. I've gotten to know him now for 11 years. That guy works 15, 16 hours a day. He's very disciplined. He works out. I wish I did more of that. Nobody's invincible. But he's going to be a very tough candidate for Mr. Osborn. And I know him too. I knew him when he was the union leader here at the Kellogg's plant when they were on strike. So I got to know him.
What do you make of Osborn? I mean, we've talked about also, we had Nick Batter on this show, some other down ballot folks who run as independents. Nick Batter, got beat by a Democrat by just 100 votes, I think.
Yeah.
There feels like there's a special sauce happening in Nebraska, and structurally it's built for independence. But can you talk about, what's your takeaway from Dan Osborn, who became the most, noteworthy independent in America, and I think has inspired other independent veterans to run against Republicans and Democrats? What's your takeaway from his race last year?
By the way, let me just back up a little. Nick Batter is a sharp. I mean, he's got a tremendous story. I mean, I became a fan listening to him and knowing his story out there. And I think, and there is at the state level in unicameral, it's a unicameral, right? Yep. You can be an independent and flourish. I just think when you get at the federal level, you're either going to caucus for Republican or Democrat. And that's one thing that, Mr. Osborn could never really answer. Who are you going to caucus with? Because if you don't caucus with anybody, you're not going to get any committee assignment worth note. You'll end up being you'll be the parking lot chairman of the Congress or something, right? So you got to caucus with one or the other. And so the structure of our federal government and how it's run by two parties, I don't know how you change that with an independent, because in the end, we have two independents in the Senate, but they caucus with the Democrats. And so effectively, the Democrat Party or the Democrats there take care of their committee assignments and all of that. So that's probably the hardest part for Mr. Osborn. Any independent wants to run for Congress, he got asked repeatedly, who are you going to caucus with? And he never knew how to answer that, right? Because it's going to be one or the other. And he would say neither, or that was the hard part of his campaign, I think.
Well, he'd say neither, right? And
Yeah.
your argument is if you say neither, then you have no power, right?
Right.
Like,
Or you're going to be you're going to be the chairman of the parking lot
right,
committee.
right,
They'll
right,
make
right.
a new committee
Right.
for you.
Right. Well, and I got to let you go because you've had a busy week, but I want to ask you, before we lose you here, you're a voice that's rising. You're getting more support around the country by the day. You were on Face the Nation and everywhere nationally. I think people are looking to you to be a voice of reason in the Republican Party, especially if they want to attract independents, which they've had a harder and harder time doing. Is there a scenario where you'd run for president in 2028? To represent either a more moderate Republican voice or even as an independent?
First of all, I love my country, our country. I love what it's done. I love its history. I love what we stand for. And I believe that you have to work with people, even if you don't agree with them sometimes in another party. You got to find areas where you can work together. I read the Federalist Papers. That's the way they designed it. It was consensus building. They didn't want a party to totally shut out. They didn't use the word parties. They used factions in the Federalist Papers. But if you want this country to work, you've got to work across the aisle and find areas you agree on, because that's why we made a bicameral, separations of powers, checks and balances. And people forget that. They're like, that makes you a traitor somehow. But no, I want to govern, and I want us to solve things there. Now, I didn't plan on running for Congress in 2014 when I retired, but a series of events occurred where the incumbent lost, and I was the only one that I thought could win that was willing to run. And so I went from wanting to be a chairman of the local party to running for Congress, and I didn't see it coming, right? I am interested in national politics. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not in this position today, being a congressman from Omaha, to be able to do that effectively. There'd have to be a series of things that would occur where I could maybe serve at, in the executive branch as a Secretary of Defense, or there's got to be some things that would have to happen, I think, that would position me even better. But, that said, William McKinley was a congressman. It has happened, but it's hard to run for president as a congressman. I'll just say it that way. And I think probably a few other things would have to follow for me. It'd have to be divine because this just doesn't happen. But I am interested in running. I would be interested in being a leader nationally in our country. I have a heart. I've been studying this since I was a teenager, and I love, and I don't know. I guess I have convictions. I see what effective presidents have done, like Eisenhower and Reagan, and that's who I want to be, right? So I guess God would have to open up the right doors for that to happen. But I do want to serve and make our country viable and strong for the decades to come. That's where my heart's at.
Well, that sounds like there's an opening. So I appreciate the fact that you're honest and you're candid and you hold the line. Can I ask you one more thing that's really important to our community that I have to get your thoughts on if I can, as a veteran, as someone on national security, as someone who's willing to buck your party? Thousands of veterans are being fired. We see now, 68,000 folks are going to be fired at the VA. A third of them will be veterans. Every time HHS says they're going to lay off 10,000 veterans, 10,000 people, 3,000 of them will be veterans, right? If roughly 1 in 3 are federal workers. Are you or anybody else in Congress working on a plan to provide an off-ramp for all those veterans? We spent 2 decades trying to improve veteran unemployment, and now they're getting laid off by the thousand. And it seems to be something specifically that's resonating with the American people. Do you have any thoughts on that specifically, or plans that veterans can look to for what happens next for so many veterans, which could be 100,000 veterans by the end of the year?
Well, I've been trying to get the ground truth on this, because you read this, and then so I went to RVA and I said, how many people got fired? And they wouldn't tell me. So then I had to go to the VA secretary, and I said, hey, they won't tell me. He says, well, you deserve an answer. I found the answer. It was 9. 9 people in our local VA got fired. So it tells me it's smaller than what it is, but I feel bad for the 9. I'm not trying to defend it. But I think the scope, at least in the VA, it's not as big as some of the reporting that's out there. Now, granted,
not yet, right? They said it's coming later at VA, right?
Okay. Well, it's got to be. One part of the Doge, I don't mind. I don't mind the auditing. Show us what we're spending our money. But why are we cutting people without a lot of the analysis and the forethought? And then you got to go back and restore some of the firings. And I don't think that's right. I've said, let's be transparent, audit, but let's be very thoughtful about where we're letting people go. I think most of us think the bureaucracy is too big. But there's some of these things don't make sense. We're going to fire a bunch of people in Social Security agency, and I can't get a call back from these guys, right? I mean, the customer service Social Security agency is terrible right now, and so we got to find. So some of the stuff don't make sense, but in the end, if Congress has appropriated and the president signed it, he's gonna lose. The president will lose every time in the courts, and unfortunately, it takes 2 or 3 months to get there. And Congress has the ability to stop some of the stuff, but it also takes 2 or 3 months to do, and it's really through the power of the purse. So none of this can stop on the dime once the president makes these decisions. And I know that's not very fulfilling. If you're on the other side of this, you don't like what's going on. But in the courts have been ruling consistently that that the president has to follow the law, and that's why there's so much anger out there towards the courts right now. But they're just following the Constitution on this for the most part. There may be a few spurious things out there that maybe I'd even disagree with. But bottom line is, they're saying if you appropriate money and the president signed it, the president's got to execute that. There's no off ramp, and the courts are consistently ruling, and they're really defending Article 1 by doing this. And some of my colleagues miss that. They think it's Article 3 versus Article 2. No, more often than not, the Article 3 guys are defending Article 1 against Article 2, and that's been a winning argument.
Well, you have been outspoken in defending the Constitution, defending values, defending civility in a way that I think is really important. We talk a lot in this show about how our kids need leaders they can look up to, leaders who have moral clarity, leaders who can set an example. And especially as a veteran, as a father, as a grandfather, we appreciate your leadership, your courage. You're catching a lot of heat from your own party and from all sides, which probably means you're doing something right. But we've talked on this show about how Nebraska has something special cooking, and you're a Republican who's won in a district that's gone to Democrats the last 2 times, and you're getting a lot of, I think, support and attention, as you should, because you're rising to this moment. So
I couldn't have won without 11,000 Harris voters. They crossed over. Even more. There's probably even more Osborn voters that switched over for me. So in our district, you got to be able to appeal to the middle to win.
Well, I think that's key to the country. I think your district and your race and the support for your voice is an insight into where most of the country is. We talk about it a lot of time, that most of this country is independent, and they're looking for independent voices like you. So I still hope you'll leave the Republican Party and declare your independence. But in the meantime, we really appreciate your leadership. I hope you'll come back on the show.
Thank you.
And Nebraska is where it's at. Even the Huskers football team is looking strong lately. So we're going to keep an eye on Nebraska, and we appreciate your leadership and support, especially on Ukraine and so many important issues. Representative Don Bacon, thank you so much for joining us. Stay vigilant.
Bye-bye. Thank you, sir.